You think you're broke because you don't earn enough, because life is unfair, because opportunity is scarce. But the truth, the brutal, Machiavellian truth, is simpler and colder. You're broke because you depend. Dependency is the silent chain that wraps itself around your neck while you smile and call it comfort. You depend on a paycheck. You depend on a job title. You depend on validation disguised as opportunity. And like all forms of dependency, it feels safe until the moment it doesn't. Niccolo Machiavelli, centuries before the world was filled with credit cards, performance reviews, and motivational seminars, already understood this principle. He who depends on another man's favor, even if rich, is still poor. Because dependence is not measured in income, it's measured in control. Most people believe being broke means lacking money. Machiavelli would laugh. He knew that poverty of power is far worse than poverty of coin. The man who must ask for permission to live is already owned, no matter how much he earns. That's the first illusion of modern life, the illusion of freedom through employment. You're told you're free because you can buy what you want, travel when you want, choose your career, pick your passions. But look closer. Each of those freedoms exists inside a cage built by dependency. You're free to travel as long as your boss approves your leave. You're free to buy as long as your credit score allows it. You're free to express your opinion as long as it doesn't offend the people who sign your checks. That's not freedom. That's permission. Machiavelli would call this the new form of feudalism, not with kings and lords, but with corporations and systems. Today, dependency has been modernized, sanitized, even celebrated. The job title replaced the master's whip. The paycheck replaced the ration of bread. And the illusion of choice replaced the awareness of control. You believe you're climbing a ladder. But what if the ladder is inside a cage? What if every promotion, every raise, every performance review is just a more comfortable layer of control? Dependency is seductive because it hides inside stability. And stability is the new currency of fear. People don't stay in jobs they hate because they're stupid. They stay because dependency makes courage expensive. They stay because they've built their entire self-worth around being needed by the very system that drains them. They stay because fear whispers, "At least you're safe." But that whisper is the sound of chains. Machiavelli would never tell you to quit your job or burn the system. He wasn't a romantic. He was a strategist. He'd tell you to understand the power dynamics at play. He'd tell you that the real danger isn't being broke, it's being predictable. And dependency makes you predictable. When you depend on a single source for your survival, a company, a client, a government, even a relationship, you become manageable. You can be motivated, manipulated, or even morally redirected with something as simple as a threat to your comfort. You don't need to be coerced when you can be made to fear loss. And once that fear sets in, control is complete. This is why the truly powerful don't just make money, they build options. They never rely on one stream, one system, or one man's approval. They build redundancy, leverage, mobility, not because they're greedy, but because they understand this. The moment your survival is outsourced, your freedom is sold. Dependency is the most effective prison ever built because it's invisible. You don't see the bars, you wear them. They look like comfort. They sound like praise. They taste like stability. But they do what all prisons do. They stop you from leaving. Look around you. How many people say they want freedom, but structure their lives around dependency? They rely on one paycheck. They spend everything they earn. They trust systems that reward obedience and punish autonomy. Then they call it being responsible. But responsibility without sovereignty is just servitude with better branding. Machiavelli would dissect this modern tragedy with surgical precision. He'd say, "You are not broke because the world is cruel. You are broke because you have built no fortress." And by fortress, he didn't mean money itself. He meant protection. Protection of time, of decision, of movement. He'd remind you that in politics and in finance, the same law applies. The one who depends, obeys. The one who can walk away, commands. That's why dependency feels good, because it removes responsibility. You get to complain about the system instead of building your own. You get to wait for raises, promotions, handouts, instead of confronting the brutal truth that freedom requires construction. Dependency gives you something to blame. And as long as you have someone to blame, you'll never take control. Think of it like this. The broke man says, "They won't pay me enough." The Machiavellian asks, "Why do I need them to pay me at all?" The broke man says, "My boss is unfair." The Machiavellian asks, "Why does he have power over me?" The broke man says, "I can't leave my job. I have bills." The Machiavellian replies, "Then the bills own you, not the job." Dependency doesn't end when you make more money. In fact, it often gets worse. The higher your lifestyle, the tighter the leash. You get the house, the car, the vacations, all financed by the very system you believe you're escaping. You trade one kind of poverty for another. Before, you lacked money. Now, you lack the courage to lose it. That's the cruel paradox of modern wealth. The more you have, the more you fear losing it. And fear is the currency of control. So, Machiavelli would tell you this. If you want to stop being broke, stop thinking in terms of income. Start thinking in terms of leverage. Ask yourself, what happens if they stop paying me tomorrow? If the answer terrifies you, you're not free, you're owned. Freedom doesn't begin with money. It begins with the ability to walk away without begging. That's the mindset shift most people never make. They focus on how to earn more, not how to depend less. And that's why they stay broke, not financially, but psychologically. Because being broke isn't a lack of wealth. It's the addiction to dependence. It's the inability to move without permission. And until you break that addiction, no amount of money will save you. So, ask yourself this. Who really owns your time? Who decides when you rest, when you work, when you're allowed to dream? Because until the answer is me, every dollar you earn is just rent for a life you don't control. That's the first Machiavellian truth of dependency. You're not broke because you lack income. You're broke because you've mistaken comfort for power. And the longer you cling to comfort, the tighter the chain becomes. Dependency doesn't begin with a paycheck. It begins with programming, the slow conditioning of your mind to associate obedience with safety and comfort with success. From the moment you enter school, you're trained not to think like an owner, but like an earner. You're taught to follow instructions, meet expectations, and wait for approval. And then, the world rewards you for it. Grades, degrees, certificates, promotions, all perfectly designed tokens of controlled ambition. Machiavelli would see this for what it is, not education, but domestication. He would say, the state that teaches dependence ensures peace among the herd. Because when people believe security is earned by compliance, they become too afraid to question the system that feeds them. You think you're chasing success, but in truth, you're chasing permission. Permission to exist inside someone else's plan. That's why dependency is so seductive. It feels earned. You tell yourself you worked for that job, that salary, that reputation, and maybe you did. But what you don't see is how much of your autonomy you traded to maintain it. Dependency doesn't ask for your loyalty all at once. It takes it in increments, one compromise, one obligation, one silent concession at a time, until you wake up and realize your life no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the structures that define your worth. The system doesn't want you poor. It wants you productive. There's a difference. A poor man rebels. A productive dependent obeys. Because he has something to lose, and loss is a far stronger motivator than gain. That's why the modern machine doesn't enslave through poverty. It enslaves through comfort, by giving you just enough to feel safe, but never enough to be free. You're not trapped because you're weak. You're trapped because the system knows exactly how much to feed you to keep you quiet. Machiavelli understood that in every era, rulers face the same problem. How do you control people without them realizing it? His answer was brilliant. You make them believe they are choosing their own chains. Today, we call those chains careers, subscriptions, debt, lifestyle, and social approval. You wear them proudly. You even compete to see whose chains shine brightest. Ask yourself, how many of your daily choices are truly yours? Do you wake up because you want to, or because you must? Do you work for purpose, or because you fear the alternative? Dependency disguises itself as routine, but its real power lies in how it shapes your thinking. It makes you rationalize your captivity. You stop calling it servitude. You start calling it responsibility. Machiavelli would say, the perfect subject is not the one who obeys orders. It's the one who believes obedience is wisdom. That's what keeps most people broke, not lack of opportunity, but the belief that dependency is safety. They think being cautious protects them. In truth, it cages them. And the cruelest part? They teach their children to build the same cages, secure jobs, predictable lives, stable mediocrity. If you want to understand why you're still broke, study your dependencies. Each one is a link in the chain. Your rent, your bills, your subscriptions, your loans, all mechanisms to keep your life perfectly balanced between comfort and fear. You never have enough to rest, and you never have so little that you revolt. That's the balance every system aims for. And that balance is the death of ambition. But Machiavelli would not stop at diagnosis. He'd move to design. He'd ask, how does one dismantle dependency without losing the structure it provides? Because total rebellion is foolish. You can't fight the system by starving yourself. You outgrow it by making it irrelevant. The first step is awareness. The dependent man says, I need my job. The Machiavellian says, my job needs me until I build something that replaces it. It's not about quitting. It's about rebalancing the equation of power. Dependency only exists when one side cannot walk away. Your goal is to shift from needing to being needed. That's when the chains start to weaken. How? By creating leverage. Leverage is freedom disguised as structure. It's the quiet force that turns obedience into negotiation. Leverage means you can say no and still eat. It means your worth isn't tied to a single system, but to your ability to generate value anywhere. And the only way to build that kind of leverage is to master what cannot be taken from you: skill, discipline, and strategy. In Machiavelli's time, a prince's power came from his army and alliances. In yours, it comes from your ability to create income independently of permission. Whether that's through business, investments, or specialized skill, the goal is the same: to make dependency optional. Because the man who can leave at will controls every negotiation. But here's the irony: most people don't want that kind of freedom. They say they do, but they don't. Because freedom means responsibility. It means you can no longer hide behind excuses or systems. It means when things fail, there's no one left to blame but yourself. And for most, that's too heavy a price. So, they stay dependent, comfortable, anxious, predictable. They work hard enough to survive, but never hard enough to escape. They live in quiet fear of losing what little stability they have. And that fear, that subtle dread of loss, is what keeps the machine running. Machiavelli would say, if you want to control men, give them something to lose. And that's what the system does perfectly. It gives you comfort, then threatens to take it away if you disobey. Your rent, your job, your reputation, all hang by invisible strings. Pull one, and the others tighten. So how do you break free? You start by redefining wealth, not as luxury, but as independence. Not as accumulation, but as control over your own movements. Wealth is not how much you have, it's how little you depend. That's why Machiavelli would teach financial power not as a number, but as a structure. A fortress built quietly over time. One income becomes two. Two becomes four. You separate survival from approval. You stop waiting for permission to live. And once you've done that, once you've built systems that no longer require applause, something remarkable happens. You stop fearing loss because you've designed resilience. And when fear disappears, control shifts. Suddenly, you're not the one being managed. You're the one deciding who gets access. That's the transformation the modern world doesn't want you to see: the shift from employee to operator, from follower to source. When you depend, they control you through fear. When you build, you control them through necessity. That's the Machiavellian reversal of power, not rebellion. Replacement. Dependency isn't just financial. It's emotional, social, psychological, the invisible infrastructure that governs your choices without ever needing to shout. The most effective form of control isn't force. It's conditioning. And the most dangerous dependency is not on money itself, but on what money represents: acceptance, identity, safety. Machiavelli understood this before modern psychology had a name for it. He saw that rulers didn't need to chain their subjects. They only needed to make them afraid of uncertainty. Because when people fear the unknown, they voluntarily seek dependency. They build their own cages and call them homes. You see it everywhere today. People don't just depend on jobs, they depend on belonging. They depend on being seen, being validated, being part of something. They fear being forgotten more than being poor. And that fear makes them docile. It keeps them loyal to institutions, ideologies, and individuals who feed their need for meaning, even if it costs them their independence. That's how dependency evolves. It moves from the pocket to the mind. At first, they pay you to work. Then they pay you with identity. And soon, you stop noticing which one you've sold more of your time or your soul. Machiavelli would call this the final form of servitude, when a man's self-worth depends on the approval of those who use him. Because once you crave validation, control becomes easy. You don't need chains, just silence. A delayed message, a withheld compliment, a public demotion, and suddenly, the dependent begins to perform harder than ever before, trying to reclaim the illusion of worth. You think this is only about the workplace? Look closer. It's the same in relationships, politics, social media, even friendship. Dependency is always disguised as connection. You believe you're loved, supported, understood, but beneath the surface, a quiet economy is at work. You trade autonomy for affection. You trade authenticity for inclusion. You trade freedom for belonging. Machiavelli would smirk at the modern man who says, "I'm independent," while checking his phone every 5 minutes for approval. He'd say, "You are not free. You are addicted." Because addiction is dependency in disguise, the constant need for emotional currency. And until you learn to live without the drug of validation, you'll always be broke in spirit. That's the deeper truth behind financial poverty. Money is rarely the real issue. Dependency is. Because dependency corrupts your ability to make rational choices. It replaces logic with fear. You stop asking, "What's right for me?" and start asking, "What will keep me safe?" And the moment you ask that question, your power is gone. The dependent man always chooses safety over sovereignty. He clings to comfort, even when it's killing him slowly. He stays in the wrong job, the wrong relationship, the wrong environment, because dependency convinces him that uncertainty is worse than misery. And that's how systems win. They don't need to threaten you. They just need to make the alternative look terrifying. Machiavelli would say, the perfect ruler never needs to punish. He only needs to make his favor feel irreplaceable. That's how dependency works today, through controlled scarcity. You're made to believe opportunities are rare, that only a few succeed, that security is fragile. And so, you overextend yourself, trying to protect what you already have. You overwork, overspend, overthink, just to maintain the illusion of stability. Meanwhile, those who understand the game quietly accumulate leverage. Because they know something the dependent never realizes. Stability is an illusion created to keep you moving in circles. Let's get practical. Every dependency can be mapped. Your financial dependency, one paycheck, one platform, one client. Your emotional dependency, one approval source, one social circle, one identity. Your mental dependency, one narrative about what success should look like. Each of these creates a point of control, a place where your fear can be exploited. If someone can control the outcome you dread losing, they own you. It's that simple. Machiavelli's genius was that he never underestimated the emotional component of power. He knew men were not ruled by logic, but by attachment. He'd say, "The man who fears loss more than he desires independence can always be managed." That's why dependency isn't broken by income. It's broken by detachment. Detachment doesn't mean apathy. It means you reclaim ownership over your emotions and outcomes. It means you stop bargaining your peace for approval. You stop chasing comfort like it's a virtue. You start measuring power, not by what you gain, but by what you can afford to lose. The Machiavellian understands that real wealth begins where need ends. If you can survive rejection, silence, disapproval, you're already freer than most millionaires. Because dependency isn't about money. It's about needing something outside yourself to feel whole. And as long as that need exists, you're controllable. The moment you no longer flinch at loss, everything changes. People can't manipulate what doesn't react. They can't threaten you with what you don't crave. They can't lure you with what you've already mastered. That's why detachment is the foundation of dominance. You want to know why the powerful seem calm, unbothered, even arrogant? It's because they've detached from outcomes. They don't depend on being liked, accepted, or rewarded. They focus on positioning the one thing dependency blinds you from seeing. Because while you're reacting emotionally, they're engineering advantage. They know exactly what you'll trade when fear arrives. Machiavelli's advice would be ruthless, but precise. Stop fighting for approval. Start observing patterns. Notice who feeds your dependency, who praises you when you comply and withdraws when you assert independence. Those are your handlers, not your allies. Cut them off, or at least make them irrelevant. Because the longer you orbit around their validation, the more predictable you become. The world is full of manipulators who understand dependency better than you do. Advertisers, politicians, employers, even friends, all study the same human weakness, the desire to feel safe and seen. That's why marketing doesn't sell products, it sells belonging. That's why corporations don't offer salaries, they offer identity. And that's why you'll never win the game until you stop needing what they dangle. So, here's the Machiavellian exercise. List everything in your life that makes you feel safe. Then ask yourself, what if it disappeared? If the answer is panic, then that's where you're enslaved. Because power doesn't come from possession. It comes from resilience. Dependency thrives where detachment is absent. Every system you depend on knows this. That's why they invest billions to keep you comfortable, distracted, and slightly afraid. They don't want collapse. They want quiet compliance. They want you busy enough to never ask who really benefits from your obedience. And so you work, you spend, you entertain yourself, all while mistaking motion for progress. But Machiavelli would whisper a different truth. The man who cannot pause, cannot see his own chains. That's why reflection is dangerous. It exposes dependency for what it really is. A bargain you didn't know you made. A deal where you traded potential for predictability. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The moment you recognize how dependency shapes every decision you make, you begin to take back control. You start asking new questions. Who benefits from my fear? Who profits from my comfort? Who loses power when I stop depending? And those questions, not money, not status, mark the beginning of true freedom. Freedom is not won through rebellion. It's engineered through structure. The weak shout about liberation. The strong design systems that make it unnecessary. Machiavelli never glorified chaos. He glorified control. And control, in its purest form, means you no longer require permission to live. You don't break dependency by destroying the system. you outgrow it. You build your own mechanisms of survival and power, small at first, fragile, then unstoppable. You don't protest the castle. You quietly build your own city outside its walls. And by the time they notice, you no longer need their gates open. That's the Machiavellian truth about independence. It's not an act of defiance, it's an act of creation. You don't win by shouting, "I don't need you." You win by making their relevance optional. Dependency withers when you stop feeding it. But most people never reach that stage because they misunderstand what freedom costs. They want autonomy without austerity. They crave control without sacrifice. They want to escape the system while keeping its comforts. That's impossible. Freedom and comfort do not coexist. They compete. You either choose the discipline of independence or the sedation of dependency. Machiavelli would call this the discipline of the prince. He wrote that a ruler must learn to live as if luxury is temporary and control is eternal, because the moment comfort softens you, dependency returns in a new form. Even kings can become slaves to pleasure, to pride, to public approval. He'd remind you, the man who rules others must first master himself, and mastery begins in silence. While others seek attention, you seek information. While others chase admiration, you chase leverage. Every dependency thrives in noise, distraction, comparison, ego. The Machiavellian kills noise. He studies quietly, builds quietly, detaches quietly, because silence is the crucible of strategy. When you stop performing for validation, you start planning for power. So how does this look in practice? It begins with ownership, not of property, but of process. You build assets that generate income without approval. That could mean a business, a skill, an audience, or an investment. Anything that creates flow instead of dependence. You learn to operate in multiple directions, so no single failure can break you. You create redundancy, multiple streams, multiple identities, multiple layers of leverage. You build optionality, because power is the ability to choose. Dependency is a single point of failure. Independence is distributed control. The dependent man asks, "What if I lose this job?" The Machiavellian asks, "Why would I only have one?" That mindset shift changes everything. You stop chasing stability and start constructing systems. Systems don't beg, they replace. But leverage doesn't just apply to money, it applies to people. The Machiavellian doesn't isolate himself. He connects, but never depends. He forms alliances, not attachments. He knows every relationship is an exchange of value, and he enters each one with clarity, not emotion. To the dependent, connection is comfort. To the strategist, connection is capital. One drains, the other compounds. You may think this sounds cold. It is, because true independence requires emotional discipline. You must learn to say no, not from anger, but from control. To decline an opportunity that compromises your sovereignty. To walk away from praise that costs you focus. To endure moments of isolation without mistaking them for failure. That's the price of freedom, solitude, self-reliance, and strategic patience. Machiavelli would warn you, the path to power is not glamorous, it's lonely. You will lose the comfort of belonging before you gain the luxury of choice. People will call you detached, arrogant, even heartless. They'll tell you to be realistic. What they really mean is, be predictable, because your independence reminds them of their chains. But once you cross that threshold, dependency loses its grip. You start to see the patterns clearly. Every advertisement, every algorithm, every authority figure, all designed to feed your need to belong. And you no longer respond. You don't react to noise, you read it. You don't seek validation, you study behavior. You become what Machiavelli described as the unmoved mover, the one who influences outcomes without being influenced by emotion. At that level, money becomes secondary, because money is only the visible form of leverage. The invisible form, discipline, patience, adaptability, is what makes wealth sustainable. Without those, riches become just another dependency. How many people earn more and still remain broke in spirit? They've built wealth, but not sovereignty. They've multiplied possessions, but not power. They're still dependent, only now on luxury, image, and applause. Machiavelli would smile at their folly. He'd say, "The wise man does not collect things, he collects positions." And he'd be right. Positions outlast possessions. When you hold a position in business, in society, in influence, the system bends toward you. You no longer chase, you attract. You no longer ask, you dictate terms. And that shift from chasing to positioning is the essence of power. So, if you truly want to stop being broke, stop asking how to earn more. Ask how to depend less. Start removing the layers of permission in your life. How much of your income requires approval? How much of your peace requires applause? How much of your time is rented to those who don't deserve it? Every yes that doesn't serve your sovereignty is another shackle disguised as opportunity. Freedom is subtraction, not addition. You don't acquire it, you strip everything that keeps you obedient. The obligations you hate, the opinions you fear, the expectations you obey. When those are gone, what remains is power in its purest form, self-direction. Machiavelli's final lesson is simple but brutal. The dependent man mistakes gratitude for virtue. You've been trained to feel grateful for every opportunity, even those that enslave you. Grateful for jobs that drain you. Grateful for systems that exploit you. Grateful for approval that silences you. Gratitude without discernment is the perfume of captivity. Stop thanking your captors for your cage. The world will tell you dependency is noble, that cooperation, loyalty, and compliance are virtues. And sometimes they are, but only when they are chosen, not coerced. The Machiavellian is not a loner, he's a chooser. He decides when to align, when to separate, when to serve, and when to command. His loyalty is strategic, never emotional. He gives freely, but never blindly. And that's why he can move in any system without being owned by it. When dependency dies, something profound replaces it: clarity. You stop chasing wealth for validation and start using it for navigation. You stop proving your worth and start expanding your reach. You stop being reactive and start becoming inevitable. Because at the end of all of this, the work, the discipline, the detachment, Machiavelli's true lesson on dependency is not cruelty. It's design. He wasn't teaching manipulation for its own sake. He was teaching survival in a world that rewards control. Dependency makes you predictable. Independence makes you invisible until you decide to appear. And the man who can disappear at will can never be owned. So, the real reason you're still broke isn't because you lack opportunity. It's because you've built your life around permission. You've been trained to earn instead of engineer, to please instead of position, to survive instead of strategize. And until you break that mental dependency, every dollar you earn will serve someone else's freedom more than your own. The Machiavellian path is harsh but simple. Detach, design, dominate quietly. Because when you no longer depend on systems, validation, or comfort, you don't just become rich. You become untouchable.